In the year 1847, during the final decades of the Tokugawa shogunate, when the cherry blossoms bloomed over Edo Castle and the rigid social order seemed unshakable, my life was forever changed by a single scroll bearing my father's seal. My name is Akemi Hayashi, daughter of a minor daimyo from Shinano Province, and this is the story of how one betrayal taught me the true meaning of honor. Welcome back to Tales from the Rising Sun, where we explore the untold stories of Japan's most fascinating historical period. Today's narrative takes us deep into the complex world of political marriages, family duty, and the courage it takes to forge your own path when the weight of tradition threatens to crush your spirit. The Golden Cage: Life in a Samurai Household. The morning mist still clung to the pine trees surrounding our ancestral estate when the messenger arrived. I remember that day with crystalline clarity, the way the early sunlight filtered through the shoji screens of our family's reception hall, casting delicate shadows across the tatami mats where I knelt in perfect seiza position, my hands folded respectfully in my lap. At 19, I had already mastered the essential arts expected of a samurai daughter. The graceful movements of the tea ceremony, the precise strokes of calligraphy, the haunting melodies of the koto, and the deadly accuracy of naginata combat. My education had been comprehensive, designed to make me an asset to whatever family would eventually claim me through marriage. But nothing in my carefully orchestrated upbringing had prepared me for what was contained in that crimson-sealed scroll. My father, Hayashi Nobuyoshi, was a man of few words, but considerable ambition. Our domain in Shinano, while modest, occupied a strategically important position along the Nakasendo Road connecting Edo to Kyoto. For generations, the Hayashi clan had served as loyal retainers to the Tokugawa, our swords ready, our loyalty unquestioned. That morning, as father read the contents of the message, I watched his weathered face transform. The perpetual worry lines around his eyes deepened, but there was something else there. A glimmer of opportunity that made my stomach clench with unnamed dread. "Akemi," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of generations of duty. "The shogun has honored our family beyond measure. His eldest son, Tokugawa Ieyasu, requires a wife of suitable breeding and accomplishment. You have been selected." The words hit me like a physical blow. Ieyasu! I knew that name, whispered in court circles with a mixture of respect and carefully concealed concern. The heir to the most powerful position in Japan, but also a man whose reputation preceded him in ways that made noble families hesitant, despite the immense honor such a union would bring. The weight of ancestral duty. In feudal Japan, the concept of individual choice was not merely discouraged, it was virtually inconceivable. The family unit, the clan, the domain, the shogunate, these were the pillars upon which society rested, and each person's role was predetermined by birth, gender, and social position. As a samurai daughter, my primary value lay in my ability to strengthen alliances through marriage, to bear sons who would continue the bloodline, and to maintain the honor of both my birth family and my husband's clan. Yet, as I knelt there in our family shrine that evening, incense curling around the ancestral tablets while I sought guidance from those who had come before, I felt a rebellion stirring in my heart that no amount of cultural conditioning could suppress. My mother, Yukiko, had died when I was 12, but her final words to me echoed in that sacred space. Remember, my daughter, that true honor sometimes requires the courage to stand alone, even when the entire world tells you to kneel. The weeks that followed my father's announcement passed in a blur of preparation. Seamstresses arrived from Kyoto to craft my wedding kimono, a masterpiece of silk and gold thread that would have fed a farming village for months. My trousseau grew to include everything from precious tea ceremony implements to rare books of poetry, each item carefully selected to demonstrate the Hayashi family's refinement and wealth. But beneath the surface of these elaborate preparations, disturbing details about my intended husband began to emerge through the careful conversations of servants and the worried glances of visiting relatives. Whispers in the garden, the truth revealed. It was my aunt, Mariko, who finally gave voice to what everyone else had been too afraid to say. She had served in Edo Castle as a lady-in-waiting during her youth, and her knowledge of court politics was both extensive and precise. "Child," she said one evening as we walked through our family's maple garden, the autumn leaves creating a carpet of gold and crimson beneath our feet. "You must understand what you are walking into. Isada is troubled. The pressures of his position, the expectations placed on him, they have affected his mind." She paused beside a stone lantern, her elegant features troubled in the flickering light. "There have been incidents with previous marriage arrangements. Young women who return to their families after only weeks, speaking in whispers of erratic behavior, of rages that could not be predicted or controlled." My blood ran cold. "What kind of incidents?" Mariko's eyes were filled with sympathy as she continued. "He is obsessed with the idea that everyone around him is plotting against the Tokugawa. He sees threats everywhere, even in the most innocent actions. His previous bride was accused of espionage simply for writing letters to her family. She was confined to her quarters for months before her father could negotiate her return home in disgrace. The implications were staggering. In a society where a woman's reputation was everything, being returned to one's family after marriage was a fate worse than death. It meant disgrace not only for the woman herself, but for her entire bloodline. "Then why," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, "is father proceeding with this arrangement?" The answer, when it came, revealed the complex web of political necessity that governed our world. The Hayashi domain was heavily in debt. Our rice harvests had been poor for 3 consecutive years, and rumors of foreign ships approaching Japan's shores had made the shogun increasingly paranoid about the loyalty of his retainers. A marriage alliance with the shogun's family would not only clear our debts, but would also place the Hayashi clan among the most trusted advisors in the realm. For my father, the choice was simple: sacrifice one daughter to save the entire family line. The Wedding of Shadows, a ceremony of duty. The journey to Edo took 7 days along the Togado Road, a procession stretching nearly a mile with palanquin bearers, guards, servants, and the dozens of chests containing my dowry. I traveled in a beautifully appointed norimono, its interior cushioned with the finest silk, but I felt like a prisoner being transported to her execution. Edo Castle, when I first glimpsed it through the curtains of my palanquin, was both magnificent and intimidating. The massive stone walls rose like mountains from the heart of the city, their white plastered surfaces gleaming in the afternoon sun. Within those walls lay the administrative center of the most powerful military government in Japanese history, home to the man who held the lives of 30 million people in his hands. The women's quarters of the castle were a world unto themselves, a labyrinth of interconnected buildings where hundreds of ladies-in-waiting, concubines, and noble wives lived according to protocols so complex that entire books have been written simply to explain the proper way to serve tea to visitors of different ranks. I was assigned quarters befitting my new status, rooms that were elegant beyond anything in our provincial estate. Silk screens painted with scenes of cranes and pine trees divided spaces that could have housed my entire family. And the finest craftsmen in Japan had created every detail, from the carved wooden ranma panels to the delicate bronze incense burners. But luxury could not ease the growing dread in my heart as the wedding day approached. The unforgivable act, a betrayal of trust. The ceremony itself was everything that centuries of tradition demanded, an elaborate pageant of ritual precision that transformed two individual lives into a single political entity. I wore the traditional white kimono of purity, my face painted with the formal cosmetics that marked me as a married woman of the highest rank. Iyasada appeared every inch the noble heir, his formal court robes magnificent, his bearing dignified. To observers, we must have seemed the perfect embodiment of aristocratic union. But I could see the tension in his movements, the way his eyes darted constantly around the room, as if searching for hidden threats. The first 2 weeks of our marriage followed the expected pattern. We lived in separate quarters within the castle complex, meeting for formal dinners and ceremonial occasions as protocol demanded. Isada was distant but correct in his behavior, and I began to hope that perhaps the whispered stories had been exaggerated. Then came the night that changed everything. I was awakened by the sound of sliding doors being forcefully opened. Isada stood silhouetted in the doorway, still wearing his formal robes, but disheveled, his hair falling loose from its topknot. Behind him stood 2 samurai guards, their hands resting on their sword hilts. "You have betrayed me," he said, his voice carrying a cold fury that made my blood freeze. "The letters you have written to your family contain coded messages to enemies of the Tokugawa." I sat up in confusion, pulling my sleeping robe around me. "My lord, I don't understand. I have written only of household matters, of my gratitude for this honor." "Lies!" His shout echoed through the chamber. "Do you think me a fool? When you wrote to your father about the beautiful cherry blossoms in the castle garden, you were informing him about the deployment of guards. When you mentioned the excellent quality of the tea ceremony implements, you were reporting on the shogun's daily routines." The accusations were so absurd that for a moment I could only stare in shocked silence. These were innocent observations, the kind of details any homesick daughter might share with her family. But in Isada's mind, they had been transformed into evidence of an elaborate conspiracy. What happened next was the unforgivable act that would define the rest of our relationship. Without warning, without allowing me to defend myself, Isada gave a sharp command to his guards. They stepped forward and began systematically destroying everything in my quarters that connected me to my family and my past. They tore apart the letters from home that I had treasured, burning them in the brazier while I watched in helpless horror. My personal poetry collection, containing verses I had written since childhood, was fed to the flames. The small shrine I had erected to honor my mother's memory, complete with her favorite incense and a painting she had created, was dismantled and carted away. But the cruelest act was yet to come. From a lacquered box in my writing desk, Iesada himself retrieved the one possession that meant more to me than all the elaborate wedding gifts combined, a small jade hairpin that had belonged to my mother, the only thing of hers I had been allowed to bring to my new life. "This," he said, holding the delicate ornament up to the lamplight where its green surface seemed to glow like captured moonbeams, "is obviously a signaling device. the way it catches light could be used to send messages to Confederates outside the castle walls. Before I could protest, before I could explain that it was simply a cherished memento with no purpose beyond sentimental value, he threw it to the floor and crushed it beneath his heel. The jade, worked by skilled artisans generations ago, shattered into fragments that scattered across the tatami mats like tears of green stone. The fortress of isolation. Life under suspicion. From that night forward, my existence in Edo Castle became a carefully monitored imprisonment. Guards were stationed outside my quarters at all times, and every piece of correspondence was examined by Iesada's trusted advisors before being either delivered or destroyed. My movements within the castle were restricted to a few specific areas, and I was forbidden from speaking with anyone who was not directly involved in my daily care. The isolation was perhaps worse than the surveillance. In our provincial estate, I had been surrounded by people who had known me since childhood, who understood my moods and mannerisms, who could distinguish between melancholy and plotting. Here, I was studied like a dangerous animal, every gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. My ladies-in-waiting, women who should have been companions and confidants, instead became reluctant jailers. They performed their duties with professional competence, but avoided any conversation beyond the strictly necessary. I understood their position. Association with someone suspected of disloyalty could destroy their own family standing at court. The worst part was the gradual erosion of my own sense of reality. When every innocent action is interpreted as evidence of treachery, when normal human emotions are seen as dangerous deceptions, you begin to question your own motives and memories. Had I unconsciously included coded information in my letters? Were my tears of homesickness actually calculated performances designed to elicit sympathy? Isada's visits to my quarters became increasingly unpredictable and disturbing. Sometimes he would arrive in the middle of the night, demanding that I explain the hidden meaning behind conversations I had had with servants weeks earlier. Other times, he would quiz me about my family's political connections, convinced that our modest domain was secretly harboring enemies of the state. The man I had married was not evil in any traditional sense, but he was trapped within a prison of paranoia that transformed every relationship into a potential threat. The immense responsibilities of his position, combined with the Byzantine politics of the Tokugawa court, had created a worldview where trust was impossible and conspiracy lurked behind every smile. The art of invisible resistance, finding strength in silence. But even in those dark months of captivity and suspicion, I discovered reservoirs of strength I never knew existed. The teachings of my childhood, the disciplines of tea ceremony, calligraphy, and martial arts, became more than mere accomplishments. They became forms of meditation, ways of maintaining my sanity and identity when everything else was stripped away. In the precise movements of preparing tea, I found moments of peace where my mind could escape the constant scrutiny. The flowing strokes of brush on paper became a form of silent prayer, a way of communicating with the part of myself that remained free despite physical confinement. Most importantly, I began to understand that resistance did not always require dramatic gestures or open rebellion. Sometimes, the greatest act of defiance is simply refusing to let external circumstances destroy your inner self. Every day that I maintained my dignity, every moment that I chose compassion over bitterness, was a victory against the forces that sought to break my spirit. I also began to see Iyasada with new eyes, not as a cruel oppressor, but as another victim of the same rigid system that had trapped me. His paranoia was not personal malice, but the inevitable result of being raised to believe that everyone around him was either a potential enemy or a valuable asset. In a world where human relationships were subordinated to political necessity, genuine connection became almost impossible. This realization did not excuse his treatment of me, but it helped me understand that my situation was not the result of individual cruelty, but of systemic problems that affected everyone within the castle walls, from the highest nobles to the lowest servants. As the months passed, rumors began to circulate throughout the castle about strange developments in the outside world. Foreign ships had been sighted off the coast of Uraga, their massive size and unknown intentions causing panic among the shogun's advisors. The isolated world of Tokugawa Japan was about to collide with forces that would ultimately transform the entire social order. These external pressures had an unexpected effect on my personal situation. As Iyasada became increasingly consumed with questions of national defense and foreign policy, his obsessive focus on my supposed treachery began to wane. The imaginary conspiracies within the castle walls seemed less important when faced with the very real challenge of responding to foreign demands for trade and diplomatic relations. For the first time in months, I was allowed to take walks in the castle gardens without constant supervision. The autumn maple trees were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, and the sight of their beauty, unchanged despite all the human drama swirling around them, reminded me that there were forces in the world larger than political intrigue and personal grievances. During one of these walks, I encountered an elderly woman who had served in the castle for over 40 years. Her name was Chio, and she had witnessed the rise and fall of numerous political figures while maintaining her position through careful neutrality and absolute discretion. "Young mistress," she said as we paused beside a pond where golden carp swam in lazy circles, "I have seen many women come and go from these walls. The ones who survive are not necessarily the strongest or the most clever, but the ones who remember that this too shall pass." Her words carried the wisdom of decades spent navigating the treacherous waters of court politics. The world outside these walls is changing in ways that none of us can predict. The old certainties are crumbling, and new possibilities are emerging for those brave enough to seize them. The Great Revelation: Understanding the Game. As winter gave way to spring in 1854, the arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships fundamentally altered the balance of power within Japan. The shogun's government, faced with technological superiority they could not match and diplomatic pressure they could not ignore, was forced to sign treaties that ended Japan's centuries of isolation. These momentous events had a surprising impact on my personal circumstances. The marriage that had been arranged to strengthen political alliances suddenly seemed less relevant in a world where traditional power structures were being challenged by forces from across the ocean. More importantly, the crisis revealed aspects of Iyasada's character that had been hidden beneath layers of paranoia and suspicion. When faced with genuine external threats, he displayed the strategic thinking and decisive leadership that had been bred into him through generations of samurai training. The man who had seen conspiracy in my innocent letters was capable of remarkable clarity when dealing with actual political challenges. One evening, as reports arrived of foreign demands for commercial treaties, Iyasada trained to my quarters in a state unlike any I had previously witnessed. Instead of accusations and suspicion, he seemed almost vulnerable, weighed down by responsibilities that had grown beyond any individual's capacity to manage.